This video was made with the help of my lovely patrons.
At Diversity Today, we believe it's very easy to be a hero. All you need are honesty, empathy, respect, and open-mindedness.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that's not all it takes to be a hero.
Oh, great. Well, what is a hero to you?
A hero kills people. People that wish him harm.
So around a month ago, I was posting online about this video idea that I had about anti-heroes in action, where I was going to analyze micro-inactions that define various fictional anti-heroes, primarily from film and television. I particularly mentioned Walter White and BoJack Horseman, as they have two defining moments of inaction. When it comes to Walter, it's his purposeful inaction of not saving Jane and letting her die, which then directly affects Jesse's relationship with him, and thus becomes one of the main underlying tensions until its revelation. With BoJack, it's similar, as he lets another female character die, Cheyenne Lin, by waiting 17 minutes before calling an ambulance to save her life after a fatal overdose. However, I decided to reflect more on this topic after reading many comments that said no, Walter White is just a straight-up villain. Sure, he's the main character, but he's a villain that just so happens to be the protagonist. And that really took me aback, because when you look up various lists of anti-heroes, Walter White is almost always at the top of the list. But it seems as though some audiences have been reevaluating his character in the past few years. To many contemporary viewers, he either goes from anti-hero to villain, or is a villain protagonist for the entire series, ruining everyone's lives along his journey, only acting selfishly and becoming unredeemable and totally unsympathetic. As we disapprove more and more of his actions, he loses the underlying pathos we're supposed to have for your typical anti-hero, who we may not approve of but still remains relatable and understandable. Most of us can't relate to poisoning a child, no matter what the reasoning behind it is. So does that mean that we misread Walter White? Is he not an anti-hero? And if he's not, then what is he? If the anti-hero definition is not set in stone and the boundaries that qualify this character type are subjective because they are based on our own sense of morality, what does this shift in labeling say about us as viewers and our own moral compass? What does calling Walter White a villain instead of an anti-hero say about how we relate to him and how we want ourselves to be perceived? In short, what do these labels that we give fictional characters imply? So, in this video, I want to delve into this character label spectrum and get to the bottom of this question: what defines an anti-hero, or at least what's the most agreed upon definition, and do characters like Walter White really fit under this term? So, let's go. So through my research of various character labels, the general spectrum looks like this. There's the hero and villain, and in between there's the anti-hero and the anti-villain. And under these general main labels are different categories. There's the tragic hero, the epic hero, the reluctant hero, the superhero, the classic hero, and of course my personal favorite, the everyman hero. Under the general term anti-hero, we have the corrupt protagonist, the classical anti-hero, the pragmatic anti-hero. Then under the term anti-villain, we have the sympathetic villain, the well-meaning objector, and the situational anti-villain. Lastly, under the term villain, we have villain protagonist, reveal/twist villains, the mastermind, the beast, the femme fatale, the bully, and the impersonal force. And on top of all of this, there's the protagonist and antagonist, or the main POV character and their oppositional force. And though it seems as though the protagonist is synonymous with the hero and the antagonist is synonymous with the villain, that's not always true. Throughout literary and film and television history, these lines have been heavily blurred. And though the anti-hero is a trope that has been around since the days of Greek theater in the US, according to cultural critic Isabel Brandt, the anti-hero began to gain popularity with the rise of westerns and film noir in Hollywood around the 1940s. In a way, the loss of innocence in film and television mirrored the loss of innocence that those in the US were experiencing. World War II was just the beginning of a major shift in American culture. In the century that followed, the Civil Rights Movement, the Cold War, and the Vietnam War created schisms between the American people and the American government. This created the perfect backdrop for a not-so-perfect protagonist, Taxi Driver's Travis Bickle, an isolated Vietnam War vet who wanted to assassinate a presidential candidate, for example. With the golden age of television at the end of the 1900s and the start of the 21st century, there was a shift in the types of protagonists featured on the small screen, with long-form prestige network dramas. During this period, there was the anxiety about Y2K, the seemingly end of history as discussed by Brody Deschanel in their excellent video about Sex in the City, and afterwards the 9/11 attacks sparked fear, and the 2008 financial crisis was responsible for a loss of faith in the economy and a rise in national frustration and disillusionment. Nowadays, many main characters aren't clear-cut heroes, but anti-heroes or even villains, and your antagonist, the one standing in the way of your main character, can be a force for good. This is perfectly illustrated in the dichotomy between Hank Schrader and Walter White. Hank is right in his suspicions about Walt, but he's the antagonist to our protagonist and POV character, Walter White. In Breaking Bad, the roles are reversed. We don't want Walter to be caught. We don't want good to triumph over evil. Or do we? Put a pin in this for later. This dynamic can be seen in various other crime dramas where the audience is aligned with the criminal due to the framing of the story. As Brandt writes, the extent to which they lack heroism can vary, but anti-heroes are more than just a flawed hero. In many cases, the anti-hero may be seen as a horrible villain by those around them, but the story that they occupy is still framed around them. Humbert from Lolita is an unreliable narrator who's the protagonist of the story, but who is undoubtedly evil and the antagonist in Dolores' life. But because he's not telling the full story, and since he's our POV character, we align ourselves with him. We want him to kill Quilty and get revenge because of this biased and very intentional way of storytelling. Much like Breaking Bad, Walter being evil and us as audience members witnessing that evil and grappling with it is all purposeful. But depending on how much you're willing to put up with and your own moral values, you may view Walter not as a hero, but rather as a villain, or an anti-hero with hero in the name only. And here the nomenclature comes into play because simply calling White a villain doesn't make much sense, as villains are usually supporting characters, not main characters. So by referring to him as an anti-hero, we signify that he's the protagonist. Hence the villain-protagonist label that people tend to throw around as well. But does it matter what we call White? What's in a name? The short answer is that names and labels are placeholders and signifiers for what we want to express and a shorthand for different meanings. When someone says that they think Walter White is a villain, they're saying that he has no redeeming qualities. When someone calls him an anti-hero, it means that they believe he has some redeeming qualities. And using these labels also tells the world where we stand morally on Walter's actions, or at least tells others what we take away from the story. For the long answer, we first need to delve more deeply into the definitions of these terms. So let's go.
What is a hero to you?
A hero kills people. People that wish him harm.
Okay.
A hero is part human and part supernatural. A hero is born out of a childhood trauma or out of a disaster that must be avenged.
Well, broadly speaking, hero protagonists possess good and positive qualities that are admirable. They possess a moral compass in which the audience agrees is upright. They have idealism as well as courage and bravery, and viewer sympathy and understanding. Think of Hercules, Spider-Man, Superman, and Katniss Everdeen. Though they may have flaws, they learn and grow from them, as well as feel remorse and empathy. They want to right wrongs and do so in noble ways, notably through sacrifice.
I volunteer as tribute!
Then there's anti-heroes. The anti-hero definition, like we mentioned before, is inherently flexible because it's by nature subjective. It depends on where we stand morally if we see anti-heroes as redeemable and sympathetic, or just heroes in name only. The definition and overall concept is so broad, even characters like Harry Potter and Robin Hood have been given this label by screenwriting courses. Harry, as the pragmatic anti-hero, is seen as such because he uses violence to subdue Voldemort. Robin Hood is seen as an anti-hero because he's breaking the law by stealing to redistribute wealth. I don't really understand this way of thinking. I guess he's an anti-hero to viewers who believe legality equals morality, but isn't Robin Hood just a plain old hero? Another definition of anti-hero is someone who in the end does the morally right thing because they know deep down that they want to do good. Characters who do good but use immoral means to achieve those ends. Under this definition, we could put Batman, who upholds the law with his own moral code. And to many, he's seen as an anti-hero because he's a vigilante, even though he's basically a cop. On the other hand, is he a net positive? His presence, some argue, is the only reason why villains like the Joker even exist. I don't know, it's just odd to me how simply going against the established in-universe law and moral code can make you an anti-hero even if you're doing something technically heroic by stopping crime or redistributing wealth. To me, an anti-hero isn't someone who does good either purposefully or by accident, or someone who wants to do good, but rather someone who does evil but remains sympathetic due to the intentional manipulative framing of the story. Batman, Robin Hood, and even Harry Potter, who simply upholds the status quo in the end, aren't anti-heroes. An anti-hero has to be the opposite of a hero, immoral, deceitful, depraved, but who, unlike an anti-villain or villain, is the main character that the story is framed around, and is the hero to themselves, but the villain to the good people around them. Not all anti-heroes have to be like this. The definition can and should remain flexible. But I feel like if we uphold this idea that all anti-heroes at the end have to be good or want to do good or even do good inconsequentially or by accident, it misses the point. The point of an anti-heroic character is that they have the ability to manipulate us, and that's captivating in a fictitious setting. It's not just that they use immoral means to achieve a just end, it's also that even by the end, they still might not deserve our sympathy. The fact that they remain ambiguous to us as viewers is what makes them compelling. So before we go into anti-villains and anti-heroes, let's talk about Walter White's changing labels and the discourse around what he should be called.
I'm not in danger, Skylar. I am the danger. A guy opens his door and gets shot, and you think that of me? No. I am the one who knocks.
In the beginning, Walt has somewhat noble reasons for starting a life of crime. His advanced cancer diagnosis. He claims he has to kill others and abandon his family to ironically save them and make sure they're financially well off if and when he dies. After his cancer goes into remission, however, he has no more noble cause, but still treats those around him like Jesse horribly, abuses and manipulates his wife, which, as some people have pointed out, he did since the beginning, and even goes as far as poisoning a child and even kidnaps his own baby. By the end of the series, his cancer does return, but he keeps it a secret and decides to sacrifice himself in order to save Jesse, and in some people's eyes, this means that he did do good in the end, and deserves the title of anti-hero, someone who can still elicit understanding and sympathy. But does that good deed outweigh his bad ones? Does he grow before that? Does he feel guilt or remorse? Some say no, and that though he started out as an anti-hero, he ends up a villain. Similarly, there's the character of Snape, who abuses children throughout the series, but it's all for a noble cause. Does that make him an anti-hero or supporting antagonist? And this is where things get a bit murky, right? Depending on your own moral stance, you could either see characters like Walter White and Snape as anti-heroes, or as villains, or in this constant state of flux, analyzing their micro anti-heroic inactions and their villainous reprehensible actions, and how those play out on a macro scale in the story. I personally think a more fitting label for Walter's character would be a subcategory of anti-hero, which is the corrupt protagonist, or like one commenter wrote, a villain protagonist. Anti-hero discourse remains complicated because characters like Walter White aren't only subjective to each audience member, but to time. Nowadays, I feel like in retrospect, Walter White is seen as a villain, but while the show was airing, he was an anti-hero. And despite there not being a clear answer to what kind of character he is, and despite the general subjectivity of the anti-hero label, I think the term anti-hero and others remain useful because what we choose to call these characters says something about how we viewed that piece of art and those fictional people. I actually think that it's a testament to how good Breaking Bad is as a series that it can get so many people invested in this debate of who this character is. When someone says Walter is a villain, you know where they stand on his actions, as opposed to when someone argues that he's an anti-hero. Aside from the subjectivity of the anti-hero definition, another reason why anti-hero discourse can be messy is because not everyone agrees that anti-heroic qualities and actions are bad or immoral. as even the definitions of what bad and immoral are subjective. A consequence of Breaking Bad and Walter White's character and Bryan Cranston's portrayal of him was how cool he looked, how he was able to take his masculinity back and his power back. Some audience members didn't see Walter White's ruthlessness and violence as bad, but what made him strong and badass. The TV series did a good job at making Walter play the part of the hero or anti-hero even when he was conniving and aggressive and straight up a villain. I don't know if there's any fault to place on the audience for not knowing or being able to see critically past their own biases of badass old white guy, or the production team for not making Walter's evil more explicit. I'll just let you decide. But part of the Breaking Bad fandom even sent death threats to the actress portraying Walt's wife because she was a woman and wasn't appreciative of her husband. And this is what I see as the root cause of why Walter White's anti-hero status is being reevaluated and why he's now seen as a villain to some, because of the way he was deified outside of TV and how his ends don't justify their means. If the more widely accepted anti-hero definition is someone who achieves their own version of good through questionable means, Walter doesn't really fit into that. He mainly just cares about himself and himself alone until the very end. And I think it's generally good that we're doing this reexamination, especially with hindsight at the backlash against progressive politics in the later 2010s and the plight of the angry white guy. Walt's status from anti-hero to villain is one that I think can be argued for justly, especially since during Breaking Bad's height, a lot of the early 2000s morally ambiguous characters and stories were packaged into sellable merch that gloss over the cultural critiques of the media they were capitalizing off of. Breaking Bad was critiquing the healthcare system, how teachers are treated, and the American dream, but instead companies just wanted to sell you Heisenberg t-shirts and blue meth candy. The over-commercialization of peak network TV is one of its main criticisms. Love this Game of Cones Dairy Queen sign. In addition, I think this oversaturation of anti-heroic or outright villainous characters during the turn of the century's TV's golden age made a lot of cultural critics and the public in general anxious about morality and media. Will these corrupt heroes make us more violent? What does it say about us as a society if we root for them? This moral panic combined with the early internet's rise of bad faith media criticism, where pointing out character flaws was equated with flaws in the actual work and the audiences who consume them, rather than the point of said fiction to explore flaws and evil, etc. I think this still has a long-lasting impact today and a reason why there's backlash for calling Walter White an anti-hero. And this makes me a little more wary to embrace this label change of Walter from anti-hero to villain. Though, like I said, it makes sense due to his idolization and commercialization, it also makes me wonder if there's something more sinister at play, like this turnaround of calling Walter a villain protagonist and not an anti-hero is just so we can make ourselves feel better for liking the show and for liking his character. I personally have to admit that I like Walter White as a complex evil character, and I see him as a type of anti-hero, at least by the definition that he's a hero in his own eyes, but a villain to others, while also being the protagonist and POV character. The newer villain label, like I said before, is justified especially in hindsight. On the other hand, just because you like X character doesn't mean you also condone their actions and agree with them. But because of the subjective nature of anti-heroes, when you see someone wearing a Heisenberg t-shirt, you don't know if it's because they identify with him or because they fully understand what he and his character is critiquing. On the other hand, I like to say more times than not, most of the population understands that we're not supposed to see anti-heroes as wholly relatable and good, despite the hero part of the label, and we just generally need to give audiences more credit. When there's that audience trust, we can explore fictitious evil without bad faith criticism, saying that we actually are condoning anti-heroes and their actions, because if we don't have that audience trust, storytelling becomes purely for moral instruction rather than being a place to explore the human condition. Of course, there's limits to depicting the human condition and evil, but in broad terms, I just don't want the main motivating factor for calling anti-heroes villains be because we're afraid of tying our own morality to these characters. Because then our only anti-heroes will be Batman and Robin Hood, when the term, to me at least, encompasses so much more than that. After the anti-heroes, we have the somewhat lesser-known anti-villains. An anti-villain is somebody who isn't completely evil, unlike a typical villain. They're much more complex, and their actions don't necessarily have to be particularly wicked. Somewhat counterintuitively, an anti-villain is still a villain. It's their motives which set them apart. An anti-villain's motives are actually virtuous. The well-meaning anti-villain would be someone like Javert from Les Mis, who is just trying to do his job but takes his obsession and profession too far. There's overlap here with the general antagonist character type of the well-meaning objector. Sometimes the primary opponent of a story isn't a nefarious villain, they're a good person who believes they need to take action to do the right thing, but that simultaneously impedes the protagonist. This could be Hank from Breaking Bad, who's actually a hero, but from Walt's perspective is a villain. There's the situational anti-villain. Carrie from Stephen King's Carrie is seen as such, as she fights out of self-protection, as well as understandable revenge. I also think that Walter White could fall under this label of situational anti-villain. This character might find themselves in a set of circumstances that set them against the protagonist or against themselves if they are the protagonist. For example, they might have started out as a good person, but they come up against something that has pushed them to the brink of their limits, and now they're out for revenge. Or they might simply have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The reader will understand their acts and motivations could be justified, but they won't get away with it.
You can't keep getting away with it!
Killmonger from Black Panther has been called an anti-villain, and Magneto could also be seen in the same vein. They're motivated by noble virtues, equality, breaking their people free from oppression, but have no scruples in getting there, and their version of good and justice is seen as oppositional to the protagonist. But like the anti-hero, the anti-villain is subject to subjectivity, mainly due to the passage of time and changing viewer sensibilities. Many today see Magneto and Killmonger as a kind of justified anti-hero, rather than anti-villains. Like, why are mutants second-class citizens? Why can't they fight for their rights and demand to be heard? Why shouldn't Killmonger get revenge on those who killed his people? But of course they're written to go too far in order to move the story along. As Julian Gutierrez wrote for Culture Slate, the moment Killmonger's cause went beyond that liberation point is the moment he lost himself to the rage and became a villain. He wanted to inspire fear and subjugate the people that were part of the oppressive system all around the globe, essentially just changing who's in power and who's subdued. And this is the way most Hollywood writers see the oppressed, as people just wanting to become the new oppressors, so in their fictional worlds, they turn the oppressed fighting for freedom and equality into villains who do too much and go too far, who become irredeemable. Similar discourse has been vocalized around Jet and Hama from Avatar: The Last Airbender, where their families were killed and they were tortured and displaced, but when it comes time to get revenge, unlike anti-heroes, they're villainized because they're not advocating for justice the right way. And a lot of times, the right way is just upholding the status quo because liberal Hollywood writers can't imagine a new framework that doesn't include some sort of oppression. I know I quote this a lot on this channel or my other channel, but Daenerys really was right. It's not easy to see a world that's never been before. I personally find it interesting how anti-heroes like Walter White and his white counterparts are seen as redeemable and more sympathetic due to unconscious bias, whereas characters with real political motives like oppressed anti-villains need to be put down because they want revenge for noble reasons and justified reasons. There's something to be said about how many white selfish anti-heroes are redeemable and how few anti-villains there are who go past the point of no return. If the Game of Thrones showrunners are right, that there's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story, then I think we need to start greenlighting more good stories. To finish the spectrum, there's the classic just plain old evil villain, generally a supporting character who stands in the hero's way. Think the Joker, Scar, Ursula, Maleficent, etc. Of course, now there's more sympathetic villains and misunderstood antagonists rather than just blatant evil villains. Since we have more complicated heroes, it makes sense that there's less focus on villains or that villains just can't be the same. In classic Disney movies, they've been turned into reveal twist villains or an impersonal force. The big problem your story's main character is facing might not even be a person. Sometimes the primary antagonist is an external force like a natural disaster, illness, or cultural norm. This can be seen in Moana with Te Fiti, bigotry in Zootopia, and Elemental, and even in movies like Inside Out. I think many people are starting to miss the classically evil villains, at least when it comes to Disney, that just revel in their evilness, or at least I miss that. I particularly didn't think we needed a Joker backstory movie that was just like the Walter White thing times 1,000, but guess what? We're getting a sequel. Let me know what you think about all that down below. To conclude, labels are very complex and aren't black and white, but exist on a spectrum, especially when it comes to anti-heroes and anti-villains. And though their meanings are subjective and not everyone will agree on who's who or who's deserving of what label and why, I think that's part of what makes art so interesting and also speaks to the complexity of a work, particularly as we discussed in this video Breaking Bad, but also Black Panther, X-Men, and Avatar: The Last Airbender. And though I understand where the reluctance to call Walter White any type of hero, even an anti-hero, comes from, I oftentimes wonder where this reevaluation really is rooted. Is it just backlash from his glorification outside of TV by conservative white male fans? Or is it because we're afraid of liking a character without outwardly condemning them? And why do we feel the need to condemn them in the first place rather than just take for granted that this is all a story and that our enjoyment doesn't mean that we also think poisoning children is okay? At times I wonder if this is media illiteracy or the production team's fault for making it all look too cool, unconscious bias, or just that we don't trust each other's moral judgments. But I don't think that I'll ever get a clear, clean-cut answer about that. It'll be interesting to see where TV and film go in the future, but I at least hope there's a return of classically evil villains that are fun and intriguing supporting characters. So that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know what you think of this video down below. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.